The silent collapse of America's wheat empire. How Canada took over the global grain trade tonight. As the sun sets across the fields of the American Midwest, a silent crisis deepens. Wheat farmers, many already operating on thin margins now, find themselves standing on the edge of something far worse than a bad season. They're staring down the barrel of obsolescence. This isn't just about grain. It's about something far deeper: trust. And that trust, once the cornerstone of American agricultural dominance, is now crumbling. Quietly, relentlessly. There was a time when American wheat wasn't just another export. It was the export, the bedrock of the global food economy. From Manila to Marseille, from Tijuana to Tokyo, buyers didn't just prefer U.S. wheat, they depended on it. It wasn't simply a matter of price or quality. It was a matter of certainty. American wheat was a promise. That promise has now been broken. This isn't a seasonal disruption. This isn't just another market correction. This is something far more systemic: the slow, quiet collapse of a century-old trade empire. And it's happening not through headlines or protests, but through contracts that are no longer being signed with America. Let's start with the first tremor hit hardest: the Philippines. The Philippine pivot for decades. The Philippines was one of America's most loyal wheat customers, buying over 3 million tons annually, with up to 90% of it coming from the U.S. For farmers in Kansas, North Dakota, and Montana, Manila was more than a market. It was a guarantee. Then, in May 2025, everything changed. A top milling firm in the Philippines abruptly canceled a 12,000-ton shipment of U.S. wheat. No renegotiation. No delay. Just gone. Days later, a new contract emerged, this time for 110,000 tons of wheat. But not from the U.S., from Canada and Australia. The message was unmistakable. The Philippines wasn't chasing the lowest price. It was chasing certainty. American wheat was still cheaper by $8 to $10 per ton on average. But internal government reports in Manila painted a different picture. U.S. wheat was now seen as volatile, politically entangled, and logistically risky. Buyers reported paying more in insurance premiums, facing longer customs delays, and fearing last-minute cancellations triggered by U.S. policy swings. Inland ports across the Midwest began to slow. In Kansas, some silos were overflowing inventory levels, up more than 40% compared to the previous year. Freight trains waited on idle tracks. Labor shortages compounded the issue. Immigrant workers, once the invisible backbone of harvest, season disappeared amid new immigration crackdowns. In some parts of Oklahoma and South Dakota, farmers made a gut-wrenching choice. They burned their own unsold crops. And while this unfolded in rural America, bakery shelves in Manila remained stocked, just no longer with bread made from U.S. wheat. In fact, prices of Pandesal, a Filipino staple, rose 11% in 3 weeks after U.S. supply disruptions. But when Canadian shipments began arriving, prices quickly stabilized. There were no grand announcements, no flags raised, just silence. A quiet victory for someone else. France closes the gate across the globe. Another long-standing relationship was quietly unraveling, this time in France. For decades, premium American hard wheat was the hidden foundation of French bread culture. From baguettes in Paris to croissants in Lyon, U.S. flour was a trusted ingredient. But by mid-2025, French imports of U.S. wheat dropped to their lowest level in over 2 decades. Milling companies in Marseille and Rouen stopped placing American orders. Instead, they turned to Canada. Some even reverted to domestic French wheat, despite a rain-plagued growing season. Why? 3 reasons: delays, emissions, and residue. First, shipment timelines became erratic. Second, American wheat consistently failed new EU carbon footprint benchmarks. Third, glyphosate and pesticide residue levels were too high. Several U.S. shipments were flagged at customs for chemical traces exceeding EU thresholds. And that's all it took. When a delivery is one certificate short, it can be turned away. That's risk European buyers no longer accept DOT, so the contract stopped. And another trusted pipeline dried up. Meanwhile, Canada was doing everything right. Smart harvesters, automated moisture monitoring, real-time tracking from field to port. In Saskatchewan, exporters confirmed protein content and delivery schedules in hours not days. In rural France, bakers noticed no difference in taste or texture. Only the supplier had changed. South Korea walks away. Now let's head to South Korea, where the U.S. had held a dominant position for nearly 4 decades. American wheat powered everything from instant ramen to convenience store pastries. The trade relationship wasn't emotional. It was purely practical. Until it wasn't. Between late 2024 and mid-2025, U.S. wheat's market share in South Korea dropped from 35% to below 17%. At the same time, Canada's market share exploded to over 60%. The reason? Glyphosate residue. In 2025, South Korea tightened regulations on chemical contaminants in grain. American wheat routinely tested between 200 and 400 parts per billion, far above the Korean limit. Canadian wheat averaged just 30 to 70 for Korean importers. The decision was clear. One source came with extra testing costs, potential customs rejections, and higher insurance premiums. The other came pre-certified, traceable, and hassle-free. By June, U.S. wheat had virtually disappeared from major Korean ports like Incheon and BUSA and in Washington state. Unsold inventory ballooned. In Idaho, farmers slashed acreage or switched to flaxseed and lentils. Long-term contracts vanished. Once again, there were no protests. Just resignation. Mexico turns north. Then came the blow from Mexico, a longtime buyer, partner, and neighbor. For years, Mexico had imported over 3 million tons of American wheat annually. It was one of the U.S.'s top 3 wheat markets. By mid-2025, that relationship was shattered. Imports from the U.S. fell nearly 40%. Meanwhile, imports from Canada rose over 35%. Argentina began entering the mix. Why? Bureaucratic chaos, repeated last-minute changes to U.S. export forms, documentation, and tariffs made shipments unpredictable. A single delayed train at the Texas border triggered production shutdowns in Sonora. Storage fees surged. Food prices spiked. Mexican millers had had enough. Canadian wheat, by contrast, was boringly dependable. Clean paperwork, reliable rail logistics. No political surprises. So Mexico stopped waiting. In Manitoba, exporters added testing stations to match Mexican food safety protocols. In Arizona and Texas, U.S. blending plants shut down. Farmers slashed prices by 20% just to move product, and still, the orders never came. Italy closes the book, and then came Italy, the global temple of durum wheat and pasta. Italy never issued a policy. It didn't make a speech. It made a decision. Once a top importer of U.S. durum wheat, Italy had gradually been shifting its loyalty. By 2025, Canada held 45% of Italy's wheat import market. The U.S. just 15%. The reason? Precision. Canadian labs developed durum varieties with optimized elasticity and gluten levels tailored to Italian pasta requirements. Logistics were seamlessly integrated. Italian buyers could track moisture levels